Good morning. Richard Calhoun, Creekside Realty broker, working 43 years in the Silicon Valley. We're here to talk about Silicon Valley real estate market. We're going to start off with micro markets. Then we're going to talk about Silicon Valley as a whole. Then we're going to compare the three counties, Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, and Alameda County that make up Silicon Valley. And then we'll talk about the 13 counties in the Greater Bay Area in Northern California. The slides that are flashing before you are some of the slides that we're going to be going over today. I do have an interesting comment to make on two of my slides that point out the issues and limitations of statistics. A lot of people treated them as gospel. So here's what we're going to start off with: the heat map. These micro market areas were selected to try to group similar properties together to get a better understanding and a more stable statistical model of what the market was doing. So here's the first heat map showing how inventory compares to the 10-year median. I've looked at the past 10 years, what's the median inventory, and do we have more inventory or less inventory? If you have more inventory, it would be blue in color. If you have about the same inventory, it's basically white in color. If you have less inventory, it's going to be red in color. I'm noticing that Redwood City is showing at 61, and it should have the same color as the San Mateo County coast. So that is an error and just is missing the color, but the number is more likely to be right than the color. The color takes more human interaction. Basically, you can see in Santa Clara County, we have roughly 50% of the inventory that you'd expect. In San Mateo County, if I was to pick an average number, it might be a 75%. There's basically a lack of active inventory limiting the buyer's choices. But now let's flip over and look at the other side, offers. This is how many buyers are coming in and making offers on property in the past 5 weeks. Here, a low number of offers is a buyer's market, so it's blue in color, and you can see most of the areas are blue in color. One exception, which is sort of surprising, is Cupertino, has the same normal number of offers, so it's white in color. But you can see across Santa Clara County and across San Mateo County, it is pretty blue. Now what we're looking at is days on sold inventory compared to the 10-year median. Days on sold inventory is a theoretical number. It's how quickly would the existing inventory sell out at the existing rate of sales if no new inventory would come on. It's basically a measure of the speed of the marketplace, but it's theoretical. It's not a real number, because if there were no new listings coming on the marketplace, which is never going to happen, the rate of sales would decrease. So you'll never hit that number. I guess the theory is if you have a steady state of new inventory coming in, the rate of sales should stay the same. And so it's still, it's a turn ratio. It's a standard measure of the turnover rate. Anyway, now what we're doing is we're looking at the days of unsold inventory. So that's the ratio between supply and demand, and we're comparing that to the 10-year median. You can see some areas in Santa Clara County, like South County, Morgan Hill, Gilroy, as well as East San Jose, Central San Jose, and South San Jose, have basically right at the normal speed of the marketplace. But a lot of the areas are about 75%, so 25% faster than you'd expect. If you go up into San Mateo County, in general, the area is bluer, favoring the buyers at somewhere around 125% of what you'd expect. It also looks like I have an issue with the coloring of Redwood City, because at 81%, that should be red in color, not blue in color. I didn't get my FFs in the right place, and FF is the color hexadecimal color coding. Now we're dropping, comparing to the 10-year median, and we're just looking at my normal benchmark. I consider anything between 1 and 6 weeks to be a red hot seller's marketplace, anything from 11 weeks up to be a buyer's marketplace. You can see some of the areas in San Mateo County are in a buyer's marketplace, but the vast majority of the 3-county area making up Silicon Valley is in a seller's marketplace, with these days of unsold inventory raw count being below 3 weeks. It is right about 3 weeks, or just over 3 weeks, in Alameda County. So now this is a measure of time on the actual time on the marketplace. This is sort of a benchmark. A lot of people look at the average days on market or median days on market. Both of those benchmarks have a specific negative with them. So I'm looking at the 75th percentile, which sort of mirrors the average days on marketplace without giving you a problem. When a long-term seller finally sells. What this is it's 75% of the sellers sell in less time than this, and 25% of the sellers take longer than this to sell. I consider from 1 to 3 weeks to be a red hot seller's marketplace, from 7 weeks to and above to be a buyer's marketplace. You can see most of the Silicon Valley area is red in color. There are some notable exceptions. For example, East San Jose is at 22 days, so just over 3 weeks. So it's neutral. Los Altos, Palo Alto's right at 3 weeks. So even though there's a fair amount of white on the map, most of those areas are right at the threshold of 3 weeks. Of course, some of the areas like Foster City are at 34 days, so that's getting sort of in the middle range. Your slowest areas are the expensive areas in San Mateo County at 93 days. So that's basically 3 months, or the coast at 65 days, which is just over 2 months. Now we're looking at average ask price. And one of the things I want to point out, and this is one of my diversions, you'll see that Newark and Union City are bright red, and they're bright red because the sellers are raising their asking price on average by 1.3%. And that's pretty unusual. So I went and looked at it, and there's basically 52 properties sold in the last 5 weeks. So you're only looking at 1.5 properties a day selling. You don't have a lot of volume. Out of that, 5, which is basically 10%, raised their sales price, and they raised it 2.7%, 6.1%, 6.2%, 30%, and 40%. You have a few number of sellers, basically 2, that really raised their sale price significantly. And when you only have 50 properties, each one, the 30 and raised the percentage by about a half a point, and the 40 raised it by almost a full percent. So there's your 1.5% gain. That's offset by the few sellers that went lower, and there was only 4 that went lower, and the percentages were lower: 1.9%, 3%, 3.6%, and 6.7%. Takeaway is the data is accurate, but it's almost in a way misleading in the fact that the activity of a very few impacted the overall register. That's why you're trying to get a bigger data set. These behaviors of 1 and 2 and 5 sellers don't impact your data, but you don't always succeed. In general, what this is doing is looking at the list price reduction. So this is how much the sellers are reducing their own asking price before their offers come in. You can see there's a fair number of areas in Santa Clara County where they basically took very little decrease, 0.2%. But you can start going in some of the more expensive areas, 1.5%, 2.7%, 3.6%. The huge advantage of looking at what the sellers are doing with their asking price is it gives you an indication of the softness or the overheatedness of a particular micro-market area without waiting for escrows to close to see what happened with the sale price. So it's a tight criteria, but yet a very, very valuable criteria. Now what we're looking at is the frequency. So the last slide was the average magnitude of price reductions, and in the case of Union City and Newark, price increases. Here is how common are those decreases. So in Santa Clara County, you can see a lot of these are right around 6.5%. It's not very many sellers that even have to reduce their price, and that's because sellers want to sell. Sellers do a fair amount of research before they put their house on the marketplace. And actually, a fairly common pricing strategy is to put the home on the market slightly below market value and let buyers bid the price up. There's a fair number of agents and consumers that believe that leads to the highest price, basically generating a bidding contest. You can see that in some of your areas, like the expensive areas in San Mateo County and the San Mateo County coast, price reductions by the seller are actually fairly common. On the coast, 50%. That's every other seller has done some sort of a price adjustment before they get an offer. In the expensive areas in San Mateo County, it's 1 out of 3 sellers are doing a price adjustment. Now we're looking at flipping over and looking at what the buyers are doing. This is the magnitude of overbidding. This is when the buyer comes in, how much over the seller's ask price do they write their offer at, and in an effort to try to ensure that they get the property. You can see that in San Mateo County, again, the areas are going to start sounding common for you. The expensive areas in the coast, Buyers are actually going in under the seller's current asking price when they're writing their offer. So instead of going up, they're actually reducing their price. And in expensive areas, sellers are taking a 3.5% price reduction, and along the coast, a 1.5% price reduction. You come over into East San Jose, Central San Jose, downtown San Jose, South San Jose. Buyers are going 4% over ask price. You go up to Milpitas and they're paying 7% over ask price. Cambrian, sort of the moderate affordable areas, 7% above asking price. Cupertino, Sunnyvale, 9% above. Saratoga, Los Gatos, Los Altos, Palo Alto, just over 2% above. So you can see the different areas. You go up into San Mateo County and it's right around 3%. And if you go into Alameda County, it's probably closer to 6%. The standouts in Alameda County have been and continue to be Oakland and Berkeley with 12% and 18% overbidding. Buyers are adding more than 10% of the seller's ask price to their offer. This is the frequency of overbidding. How common is overbidding? And you can see in most every area, it's fairly common. Again, the exceptions are the expensive areas were only 18%, so less than 1 in 5 sellers are getting an overbid. In the coast, it's 1 out of 3 sellers are getting an overbid. But you go into Alameda County and it's up there right around 75%. Santa Clara County is probably closer to 70%. So Alameda County is slightly more aggressive than Santa Clara County. Now you're looking at the appreciation compared to the last 9 months of 2015. And there's a very standout exception here, and it's Menlo Park, Atherton, the expensive areas in San Mateo County, having the absolute highest appreciation at 126%. So prices have more than doubled since the last 9 months of 2015. That just doesn't make sense with it being one of the slower marketplaces. Again, just like with Union City and Newark, I dug into it. And what you have happen is the median price of the homes that sell, because there are so few homes that sell, went from 4.6 million to 4.1 million to 5 million to 5.1 million to 6.3 million to 6.5 million. You can see the median price, because there's so few homes, fluctuates fairly significantly. And when you're comparing that to a median price for a fixed period of time, which decreases the volatility, you can see you get this 126%. It's an accurate number, but it's misleading. And that's one of the reasons why you also want to look at so much data. You have to go, why is this such a high rate of appreciation when it's such a slow marketplace? You need more data in order to know which data is more reflective of the actual market conditions. Here's your sold price, and here you can see that the expensive areas are $6.5 million in the expensive areas in San Mateo County. Unlike most people, there's 3 numbers here. The middle number is the median, like almost everybody tracks, but I also sandwich it by tracking the 10 percentile, the cheapest number in the given micro market area, as well as the 90%, the most expensive 10% in a micro market area, so that you can understand what price range is in each one of the micro market areas. And you can see that what areas are more affordable. The more affordable are the outlying areas, as you'd expect. The areas that are closer to the job centers, even with COVID, are still the more expensive areas. Here's a summary of what we just went over. I'm not going to go through it in detail, but the concept here is you can start over here on the left side with the micro market area that you're interested in, look across and understand what the conditions are, or come over here and either look at your monthly payment that you can afford or qualify for, or the sale price, and figure out what area is most likely areas that would work in your budget, and then work from the right to the left and see what the market conditions are. So now we are leaving the micro market areas and sort of putting all those micro market areas in a blender. This gives you typically more data stability because it's a much larger area, but it also doesn't help you understand what's happening in a given area. These obviously did not get updated for some reason, but anyway, you can see that the inventory has gone up fairly significantly in the last couple of weeks in Silicon Valley. You can see the number of offers has actually decreased somewhat, not nearly as much as the inventory has increased. This has caused DUI to go up from about 80%, which is several weeks ago, to a number that's probably about 88%. DUI is 12% roughly lower than where you'd expect it to be. You'd expect it to be right on this black horizontal line. We have only, call it what, 65%, 64% of the inventory you'd expect. You only have about 68% of the offers you'd expect. So both are on the low side. So when you do a ratio between the two, your days unsold inventory is probably somewhere around 88%. This is a table. I don't expect you to look at all the numbers and comprehend them, but the real takeaway is basically looking at volume. What is the volume of sales we had each week of each year, looking back over the same past 5 weeks? This currently, we've only sold 1,808 homes over the last 5 weeks. The record low prior to this year was back in 2007, and it was 1,978. We're only selling 91%. We're 8.5% below our previous record low over the last 25 years. If you look over just the last 10 years, the record low was 2302, and that was in 2022. So just last year is the record low for the past 10 years, but we're only selling 78% of the previous low. We're selling only 65% of the median over those past 10 years. That's something that concerns me. We've been having consistently record low volume of sales. Right now, we have been having record low number of sellers. My suspicion is the number of sellers will tend to increase sooner than the number of buyers increase. There's no way to know. That's just the way I think it's going to play out. Here's looking at the payment for the cheapest 10% home in Silicon Valley. So you can buy a home in Silicon Valley if you buy at the lower price points with a monthly payment of about $7,300. Median price is almost $13,000, $12,600, and the most expensive is $24,500. Now, there's a lot of assumptions that go into this, including the interest rate and that you're financing 80% of this. And a lot of people, especially those that can afford the 90 percentile home, probably have assets that they can transfer to the bank and get a lower interest rate. Now we're looking at in the weekly distribution of seller's ask price. As you go up and to the left, fewer and fewer sellers are taking price reductions. As you come down and go to the right, more and more sellers are doing price reductions. We're just going to step through this, and it's going to go monthly until we get to 3 months, and then it will go weekly from 12 weeks back down to 1 week. And right there's the peak of the marketplace. So just about 12 weeks ago, and you can see the market's been coming down. It bounced up that 1 week, bounced up last week, and this week it's down a little bit. So you can see there's some bounce, but again, the peak was clearly several weeks ago. You can see there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and I think I said it was 12 weeks ago. And 12 weeks ago, we're basically August 19th. And so if you go back roughly 3 months, you're approaching Labor Day. Typically, the peak of the marketplace is the Friday before Labor Day, and I think that's exactly what happened this year. Now we're flipping over and looking at the same thing with the buyers. But in this case, as you go up and to the right, the market's getting hotter, there's more overbidding. And as you go down, the market's cooling. In this particular case, the index appears to be a little bit more stable, which means it's harder to see market changes. We've been at the peak for several weeks there, but I believe the peak of the marketplace sort of happened about 4 weeks ago, and it's been coming down. And if you take 4 weeks and add the 5 or 6 weeks it takes to close a typical escrow, then you're at 9 to 10 weeks ago. So the two numbers are sort of in agreement with each other. Here's looking at the active inventory compared to the 10-year median. The active inventory is the purple. The red is going to be the least number or the hottest inventory level you'd expect. The gray is what you expect, the median, almost 3,000. And the blue is always going to be the coolest number, the number that favors the buyer the most, which is almost 3,500. We're under 1,900 homes available right now, and you'd really expect 3,000. So we're basically at about 2/3 of the inventory that you'd expect to have. Looking at the number of offers, now the number of offers is down here at 1,808, which remember was a record low, which is why it's below the lowest you'd expect it to be, because the lowest you'd expect it to be is defined by myself to be the 10 percentile. When you're record low, you're basically setting the lowest percentile. So this would be the 100 percentile. But anyway, the takeaway is we're not selling very many offers. And if you look back, you can see the reason for putting these colored lines on is that gives you an idea. You'd expect it to be following this gray line way up here, and we're not. And we're significantly lower than that. Now you're same concept for days of unsold inventory. This is the ratio between the supply and demand. Remember, inventory is extremely limited. Number of offers is extremely limited. So what's happening with the number of DUI? Although it increased fairly significantly this last week, and we'll see that when we get to some of the table numbers, we're still about 4 days faster than you'd expect, but we had been about midway. It's between 26 and 44, halfway would be about 7.5, and we're actually down to 4 days. I did my math right. You're about 25% between the two. You're favoring the sellers by about 25% instead of by almost 50%. In other words, you're 25% of the way between here and here. Between 41 and 26, at 37, you're about 25% of the way there. You're at about 89% of the DUI you expect it to be. If you were having a completely normal year, you'd be right on the black line. You can see the increase in the last couple of weeks. Here's looking at time on marketplace. So this is for those that don't like all this theoretical stuff. Just how long is it taking to sell the typical home? The quickest you'd expect it to sell is in 18 days. We're selling them right now in 18 days. Where you'd expect the market to be is at 23 days. So we're basically 5 days faster, which when you're only talking about 23 to 18, is pretty significantly faster. And the slowest you'd expect the marketplace to be is 30 days. So we're almost twice as fast as the slowest you'd expect it to be, and we're roughly 2/3 of where you'd expect it to be. And the math says you're at 78%. We're at 78% of the level you'd expect it to be. And, even though DUI went up fairly significantly, as you can see in the previous charts, here from last week, the trend is down. And from the last 2 weeks, it's fairly level, basically saying it's following the normal seasonal cycle. So that's one of the reasons I put these lines on, is so you can see what the normal cycle is. Because if you just saw the DUI increasing by almost 5 days, I think it's going to be close to 4 days when we get down to the raw numbers. That's almost to the point where it's setting off warning bells. But apparently at this time of the year, it normally increases. So when you compare the percentage to normal, you can see you're basically really not changing. Here's your average ask price reductions. The most price reductions you'd expect is 1.7%. You can see that typical and the current market data is exactly where you'd expected, 0.8% of reduction. The least you'd expect a reduction of is 0.5%. Again, a very tight criteria, but where this becomes very valuable is come back here to 2022. When did the market change? You'll have people argue all over the place on when it changed, but if you look at this what I claim is a very leading indicator, it's saying it basically started to change back here on Valentine's Day, which is before anybody sensed the market was changing. By watching an index like this, you can start getting early warnings that, hey, something's up. And, even if you just saw this rollover, you might say that's just normal. But by the time you got to here, it's falling off a straight cliff. And basically, this is mid-March. And I think if you talk to most people, they're going to tell you the peak of the market was mid-May. Some people may be as late as June. I think everybody by July knew the market was slowing down dramatically. But you can see the dramatic fall off. So even though it's a tight criteria, the expectation bounds is set by the red and the blue line, and the actual expectation, the gray line, shows you that, things are changing. There was something happened in the latter part of 2022. You can see the improvement in the marketplace in early 23. But in early 23, the improvement was basically exactly where you'd expect it to be until here, where it departed the blue line and then went up and started following the gray line. So fairly quickly, you went from a very cool marketplace being the least you'd expect it to be to exactly where you'd expect it to be. You can see and compare to what the market normally does. Here are the sellers that are taking the biggest price reductions. So because it's a tight criteria, instead of looking at the average, I'm going out and saying, hey, let's look at the extreme. Let's look at the sellers that are taking the biggest 10% price reductions. And what are those price reductions? In a bad marketplace, a marketplace that's favoring the buyer, is almost a 13.4% price reduction. Where you'd expect the market to be is the gray line, which looks like it's 89.6%. And where you are now is 89.2%. I would call these two numbers essentially equal. You can see they're plotted fairly close together, but you can see that the current data, the purple 89.2, sellers are taking just a slightly larger price reduction than they typically would be doing. And even in a hot marketplace, they take almost a 10% price reduction. But remember, this is the price reduction of the sellers that are taking the biggest price reduction. It's by no stretch of the imagination the average. That was the previous slide that was basically around 1%. Here is where you compare it to normal. So you can see that sellers are taking 3% more price reductions than they typically do. And that's the magnitude of price reduction. Now we're flipping over and looking at the frequency. How common are price reductions? And basically right now at 12%, they're pretty uncommon. And even in a hot marketplace, you're at 11.8%. How common price reductions are is actually not very common at all. The frequency, the magnitude of the price reductions are bigger than the frequency. So where you'd expect it to be is you'd expect 16% of the sellers to be reducing their price, but yet only 12% are. Here's the frequency compared to normal. So we're only having 73% of the frequency of the price reductions you'd expect. So 25% fewer price reductions than you'd expect. And again, you'd expect it on the gray line because it's fewer than you'd expect. That favors the seller. And that's why I have the red line below the black line. So you can see that favoring the seller by 25%. Here's looking at the average overbid based on the last 10 years. Again, the median is 5%, 5.5% is where you'd expect the overbidding to be. We're actually at 6.5%. You're having more overbidding, a higher overbid, a larger magnitude of overbidding than you'd expect. And you're almost approaching the hottest you'd expect because the market normally is cooling off at this time of the year. The most overbidding you'd expect is 7.1%. We're at 6.5%. So we're within 0.6% of where you'd expect it to be in a hot marketplace. This is the frequency of overbidding. How common is overbidding? We're at 68%. Typically, we're at 66. I'd call that a wash. In a hot marketplace, you're up here at 78%. And in a cool marketplace, you're down at 53%. What's it really saying in global terms? In a cool marketplace, half the sellers still get more than over their asking price in Silicon Valley. Typically, you'd expect 2/3 of the sellers to be getting overbids, and in a hot marketplace, you'd expect 3/4 of the sellers to get overbidding. And, it's just almost hard to believe that when you're talking about such a large investment, buyers are overbidding, but that's because we have such a rare commodity, housing, that people want to get it, and they're willing to pay more than the seller's asking to try to get it. Here's the appreciation or the price, the median price on log paper over time. When you're above the blue angled line, you're tending to be above where you'd expect the appreciation to be. If you're below, like we are now, just a little bit, you're slightly below the appreciation line. And that line is just freehanded in. It's not a best slope. I don't know how to do a best slope on log paper. So now we're changing out of looking at Silicon Valley as a whole to looking at Silicon Valley, 3 counties. So now you have 3 counties. We're looking at Santa Clara County in the blue, San Mateo County in the orange, and Alameda County in the gray. And we're looking at each component. Santa Clara County has 660 listings, San Mateo County 436, and Alameda County 790. Same concept with the number of offers. You can see Alameda County and Santa Clara County are very close together, just over 700 offers accepted. San Mateo County is at 350. Days on sold inventory. Here you can see the trend for the last several weeks and actually several months because, you're going back to shortly into second quarter. So basically from April 1st on, days on sold inventory has been rising slowly. San Mateo County's had a little bit more bounce. but Santa Clara County is the fastest at 32, followed by Alameda County at 37, and San Mateo County is at 43. One of the major takeaways, in my opinion, is look, San Mateo County is normally at the bottom of the pack. That changed with the pandemic. I think there's been a huge shift in the real estate marketplace as a consequence of remote working. Here's times on the marketplace for the 75th percentile seller, the long typical seller. Santa Clara County is the fastest at 16, followed quickly by Alameda at 18. San Mateo County taking much longer at 29 days, almost a full month versus less than 3 weeks. Here's magnitude of list price adjustments. So this is what the sellers are doing. San Mateo County, the sellers are taking the biggest price reductions at 1.5%. Santa Clara County and Alameda County are very close together, with the sellers only taking about 0.7% reduction. Frequency, San Mateo County, slowest marketplace, largest price reductions at 17.6%. Alameda County and Santa Clara County very close together at 10 and 11.5%. Magnitude of overbidding, this is what the buyers are doing. Here it's sort of interesting. Alameda County jumped way up 9% above the seller's asking prices, what the buyers are doing. Santa Clara County, that's basically pretty competitive with Alameda County on a lot of benchmarks, only 5% up. And even though San Mateo County is much slower with longer marketing times, higher DUI, greater price reductions, overbidding is still 3%. So it's not necessarily what you'd expect, or at least what to me is intuitive. Frequency of overbidding, 55% in San Mateo County, 2/3 in Santa Clara County, and 3/4 of the sellers are getting more than their asking price in Alameda County. This is the appreciation since 2015, the last 9 months of that year. You can see that Santa Clara County has had the most appreciation. It's actually 91% appreciation. The first one is the original value of the property. Alameda County is at 70%, and San Mateo County is coming in last at 65% appreciation. Here's the actual numbers. You can see San Mateo County is at $1.9 million. You can see Santa Clara County is not far behind at 1.830, and Alameda County is still more affordable at 1260. Same information on regular paper. The first was on log. Here's your payments for the different counties. So $15,000 for San Mateo County, $14,700 for Santa Clara County. There was a period of time that I pointed out a couple weeks ago where Santa Clara County was actually higher payment than Santa Clara because of the pricing, and Alameda County is the most affordable at $10,000. Here's the numbers for the 3 counties that make up Santa Clara County, and here, I've talked about it before, where my DUI right here, 5% is sort of my warning, and you can see you're pretty close at 3.6. You're really close in San Mateo County at 4.5. But when you take into consideration the market normally slows down at this time of the year, it's a whole lot less concerning. Now we're leaving Silicon Valley completely, and we're looking at the Greater Bay Area. Silicon Valley was the first 90 slides. San Francisco, Marin, North Bay, Central Valley, and Central Coast. And we only have 10 slides. We're starting off in the reverse order. This is the data for the different areas, so you can pick which county, which region, Silicon Valley, San Francisco. I don't combine these. The Bay Area, which is what a lot of the media reports on, so I put that out. These two are grouped together as the Central Valley, but I did not, when there's only 2 regions or even 4, it just didn't seem like it made sense to do a combined region number. I did it for Silicon Valley since that's where a lot of people are focused on. The Greater Bay Area, this is inventory. We talked about Silicon Valley coming down fairly significantly, the purple line. But if you think we've come down, look at what the Central Valley and the North Bay have. They've lost a lot more inventory on a percentage basis. Here is the number of offers in the past 5 weeks. You can see everybody's pretty close together. It's basically based on size. You can see that the city, San Francisco and Marin, has really dropped down in the number of offers recently. That's the cause for their DUI to go up. Here's the DUI for the different areas. So you can see the large increase in the San Francisco Marin area. It jumped up, but again, that's because the offers went down. It could just be a weekly fluctuation, but it is noteworthy. You can see that every one of the regions went up. Here's the marketing time. You can see that Silicon Valley, actually, the purple line turned around and went down, but every other area has basically been going up. 18 days in Santa Clara County to 41 days in the San Francisco Marin area. Here's looking at the price reductions, the typical seller price reductions. Silicon Valley is doing the least at 0.8%. It looks like the Central Coast is doing the most at 2%, followed quickly by San Francisco Marin at 1.9%. Frequency of the sellers taking the price reduction. Silicon Valley is doing the best with only 12% of the sellers doing a price reduction. Central Coast doing the most with 27%. The other three regions are very close together at about 22.5 to 23. Here is the overbid magnitude. Silicon Valley is doing the best with 6.5% over. San Francisco Marin, even though its DUI went skyrocketing, the overbidding is still at 3.5%. But remember, DUI is measuring the marketplace right now, where the overbidding is looking back about 5 weeks ago, maybe 6 weeks ago, because you need the escrows to close. The Central Coast is the least at only 0.3% over. Frequency of overbidding, Central Coast is the lowest with less than half the sellers getting overbidding. Silicon Valley is the highest at 2/3 of the sellers. Everybody else is right around 54% of the sellers are getting more than their asking price. This is the total appreciation for the different regions. The big takeaway is look at what's happened to San Francisco Marin. Only 27% appreciation, where the next lowest, being the North Bay, is at 66%. And what's sort of interesting and might take some people by surprise, the area that's had the most appreciation is the Central Valley at 86%. Central Valley's had a little more than 3 times the appreciation that San Francisco and Marin has. And I believe that's directly related to the pandemic and people willing to commute longer to get to work, making the Central Valley more desirable. Here's the sold price. You can see that San Francisco and Marin has now lower than Silicon Valley. That happened a couple weeks ago for the first time. So the cities is at 1.5. The Silicon Valley is at 1.570, so $70,000 more expensive. Here's the estimated payment. Because the price is higher in Silicon Valley, the payment's higher in Silicon Valley, but other than that, the order's what you'd expect. You can almost argue that Central Valley's gone up more than the other areas. I'd have to do the math to prove it. We've been talking about week number 33. The green is what I call my root URL. That gets you to the archive on YouTube. To join the presentation Saturday morning at 9 a.m. live, you just add in the year 2023. To get the handout, which is posted, you add in letter H for handout, 2023 0819. Any episode, you just put in the year, month, date code. Open for any questions. Not seeing anyone unmuted. I will wrap the meeting up. Thanks for coming in. Having a great week. Bye for now.